My 39th birthday started with tulips, white ones. My favorite. They were already on the kitchen island when I walked in, a sleek bouquet in a crystal vase with a small card that read, "Happy birthday, Jules. Hope today is special." There was nothing more. No breakfast, no note in his handwriting. Just printed letters, cold and generic, as if copied from a Hallmark template. I stared at the flowers for a full minute, waiting to feel something. Gratitude, maybe. Surprise. The kind of flutter you're supposed to feel when someone remembers you. But all I felt was empty. I stood there in the kitchen in my satin robe, bare feet on cold tile, sun warming the marble counters, and knew something had changed. Or maybe something had already died a long time ago and I was only now standing at its grave. It wasn't the lack of effort. It was the lack of meaning. Richard and I had been married for 11 years. Our relationship had started like something from a movie. Whirlwind travel, late-night conversations, kisses in the rain, the works. He was sharp, magnetic, successful. He swept me off my feet before I even realized I was flying. But over time, the romance faded. The laughter slowed. The trips stopped. What remained was a routine, neat, cold, and efficient. We lived like colleagues, in an elegant house with separate calendars, separate bank accounts, and eventually, separate beds. Still, I stayed. Because leaving meant failing. Because I believed in vows. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, the man I married was still in there, buried beneath the ambition and the board meetings and the perfectly manicured lies. And today, on my birthday, I wanted to believe he'd try again. Even a little. I walked over to the espresso machine, turned it on, and noticed an envelope beside the vase. Cream-colored. My name typed on the front. Julia Eleanor Rhodes. I picked it up, my hands trembling just slightly. Not with fear, but with the aching hope that maybe, just maybe, it would be a love letter. I opened it. The first words hit like a bullet. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I stopped, breathing. My heart thudded once, hard like a warning shot. My fingers curled tighter around the paper as I kept reading. The document was official. Filed, signed, dated. And the date? Today. My birthday. I dropped the letter on the counter as if it had burned me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My thoughts blurred into a single deafening silence. He had filed for divorce on my birthday. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to believe this was some mistake. That maybe this was someone else's letter. That it had been left here accidentally, that Richard would walk in with cake and candles and say, "Surprise!" But the truth settled in like poison in my chest. He knew what today was, and he still chose this. The front door opened half an hour later. I didn't look up. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, the document in front of me, tulips now slightly, leaning in the vase like they too had lost the will to stand. Richard walked in, casual, loafers clicking against the tile, phone in hand, sunglasses still on his face even though he was indoors. He paused when he saw me. "Morning," he said flatly. I didn't reply. His eyes landed on the envelope. "I see you got it." That was all. No apology, no hesitation. Just, "I see you got it." I stood slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time in what felt like months. "You filed for divorce," I said, my voice low, controlled. "Yes," he replied. "It was time. On my birthday." He shrugged as if it were a calendar error, as if the date was a minor detail in his grand plan. "It's just paperwork, Julia. Don't make it dramatic." My hands clenched. "You didn't even talk to me." "We've been talking for years, Jules. You just stopped listening." He walked past me, opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of sparkling water like it was any other Tuesday. "I gave you everything," I whispered. He paused. "No," he said, turning to face me. "You gave me your version of everything, and when it stopped being convenient for you, you gave me nothing at all." The gaslighting hit like a slap. I took a step back, breath shallow. "I loved you," I said, quieter now. Even when you stopped trying. He looked at me, eyes empty, mouth in a tight line, and said, I don't want to argue. The papers are filed. It's done. Then he left, walked out the door without another word, like a business deal. Concluded, like 11 years didn't mean a thing. I stood in that silence for a long time, and then I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had just been shattered by someone who didn't even bother to look back. The laugh of someone who realized, in one brutal morning, that she had been clinging to a ghost. And then I stopped laughing and started planning. I spent the rest of that morning pacing the living room, robe still tied, hair undone, legal document in hand. There was no one to call, no one to cry to. The few friends I had were more his friends than mine. And besides, I wasn't ready to explain. Not yet. Not when the pain was still so raw, so absurd, so humiliating. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I was calculating. For the first time in a long time, my thoughts were sharp, clear. No more excuses. No more hoping he'd come around. Richard hadn't just left me. He had discarded me. Strategically, quietly, as if I were a line item he no longer needed on his life spreadsheet. And now, he would see who I truly was when I wasn't busy protecting his image. I went to the study, a room he never let me touch. Everything was still meticulously arranged. Leather chairs, dark oak shelves, a decanter half full of scotch he only touched when celebrating or negotiating high-stake mergers. On the desk was his laptop. Password protected. Of course. But I knew. Richard. And Richard was arrogant, smart but predictable. He reused passwords like a man convinced no one could outthink him. I tried the name of his yacht, Avalon 1979. It worked. The desktop opened with dozens of folders, neatly named Wayne Corp Internal, Annual Reports, Q4 Legal, Private. That last one drew my attention. Inside I found PDFs, scanned contracts, emails, notes, a spreadsheet titled Exit Plan Final Docs XLXX. My heart raced. I opened it. There it was. My name, next to asset allocations, offshore accounts, real estate transfers, clauses in our prenup highlighted in yellow. There were even notes about the Malibu property. Wait until after filing to shift to holding trust, he'd typed. He had been planning this for over a year, a full year of birthdays, anniversaries, shared dinners where he looked me in the eye and pretended we were still a team. This wasn't abandonment. This was premeditated betrayal. I backed up everything onto a flash drive. Then I made one more move. I opened our home security app, the one linked to all the internal cameras. He thought I didn't know about the guest house surveillance, but I did. And I saw what he'd been doing every Thursday night for the past 2 months. Her, a woman half my age, sometimes bringing wine, sometimes staying until dawn. So he had filed for divorce on my birthday after months of cheating in my own guest house, and was now trying to walk away with most of our assets. No, not this time. By evening I had already spoken to a lawyer, one Richard wouldn't see coming. Margot Lewis, fierce, brilliant, and not afraid to scorch the earth. I met her once at a charity event years ago. Richard dismissed her as too aggressive. That's exactly what I needed now. When she picked up the phone, I said, "This is Julia Rhodes. My husband filed for divorce this morning. I want to take everything he thinks I won't notice." She didn't hesitate. "Come in tomorrow morning. Bring everything." That night, Richard didn't come home. No call, no excuse. He had made his move. But he didn't realize. So had I. As I lay in bed, no longer his wife, not emotionally, not legally, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "This was my birthday, and you gave me a war. Now I'll give you a gift you'll never forget." I woke up the morning after my birthday feeling like a stranger in my own skin. The sun filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, but it didn't warm me. I lay there for a moment, watching the ceiling, the silence of the house pressing against my ribs like a weight. It was strange. the calm after such a violent emotional storm. But in that stillness, something inside me had settled. Not fear. Not sorrow. Resolve. I slid out of bed slowly, wrapped myself in my robe, and moved like a ghost through the house. My bare feet whispered across the hardwood floors as I passed the hallway filled with photos, smiles, vacations, laughter frozen in time. Lies, all of them. Carefully curated snapshots of a life that had already been dismantled behind my back. The night before, I had found the petition. A signature, a timestamp, a date that will now be burned into my memory forever. My birthday. The same day he brought me roses and made reservations at my favorite restaurant. The same day he kissed me on the cheek and told me, "You deserve the world." And apparently, I also deserved divorce papers. He didn't say a word. Not then. He just left them in his car like they meant nothing. But I found them, and now things would change. By 8:30 a.m., I was already parked downtown, facing the mirrored glass of a law office that felt more like a fortress than a firm. Margot Lewis, Esquire, her name etched in gold on the glass door. I had only met her once before, at a fundraiser years ago, where she'd calmly destroyed a condescending CEO in a casual debate over tax loopholes. Richard had said, "She's too much. Women like that scare off good men." Good. She was exactly what I needed. I stepped inside and was met by a receptionist with a clipboard and steel-gray eyes. "Julia Rhodes," I said. "I have an appointment." Within minutes, Margot appeared, elegant, sharp-featured, her black suit tailored like armor. She extended her hand without a smile. "Let's talk." We sat in a private conference room, soundproofed and cold. She didn't waste time with niceties. Just opened a file in front of her and clicked a pen. "I'm told your husband filed behind your back." "He did," I said. "On my birthday." Her eyebrows barely twitched. "That's brutal. He thought I wouldn't find out yet." "But you did." I reached into my bag and placed everything on the table. The copy of the petition, the flash drive with the spreadsheet I pulled from his laptop, screenshots from the surveillance, app showing him entering the guest house every Thursday night with a woman I'd never met. I even brought a photo of the two of us from last month, smiling like everything was fine, proof that he'd been playing the long game. She reviewed it all in silence. Then she leaned back, eyes calculating. "He's clever, meticulous, but not careful enough. He thinks I'm not a threat." Margot tilted her head. "You're not a threat. You're the solution. That makes you dangerous." She tapped her pen on the edge of the flash drive. "We're going to hit him hard. File a countersuit, financial concealment, marital fraud, property manipulation, and we'll preemptively freeze any asset he's tried to move, especially the Malibu Trust. I'll subpoena his communications and his offshore records." She looked up. "But you need to understand, once we begin, there's no going back. It gets ugly, fast." I didn't blink. "I'm not going back to anything." She gave the smallest approving nod, then stood. "I'll draw up the filings. You'll get the first draft tonight. I want to move by morning. Understood?" "Yes." I left her office with a strange fire in my chest. Not anger exactly, and not vengeance either. It was clarity. For the first time in years, I felt awake. That afternoon, I returned home. Richard's car was in the driveway. My pulse picked up, but I kept my steps steady as I entered. He was in the kitchen, barefoot, in gym clothes, blending something in the Vitamix like it was a normal Tuesday. Like he hadn't detonated our marriage the day before. He looked up, surprised to see me. "I thought you'd be staying with your sister," he said. I gave him a neutral smile. "Why would I?" He hesitated. "I mean, I just figured you might want space." "I had errands." He sipped his smoothie and leaned against the counter like a man completely in control. "You know," he said, "I really hope we can keep this civil. No need to make it more painful than it has to be. Let's just let the lawyers handle it and move on with dignity." That was rich. Dignity. I nodded. "Absolutely." He smiled, relieved. Probably thought I'd be crying, begging, confused, not calmly returning from a legal war council. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't notice the fire in my eyes. He didn't see the storm coming, but he would, very, very soon. That evening, after Richard left for the gym, I walked into his study. The room he once told me was his thinking space. I always respected it. Knocked before entering. Treated it like sacred ground. Not anymore. I sat at his desk and opened his laptop, password protected. But he hadn't changed it since our last vacation. St. Barth's 2020. Within seconds I was in. I combed through folders, emails, saved drafts. Nothing too obvious. He was too careful for that. But there, tucked inside a subfolder labeled Taxes, I found what I needed. Scanned forms showing properties listed under an LLC I'd never heard of. Addresses I didn't recognize. One in Nevada, one in Florida, one in Switzerland. He'd been planning this for a while. He wasn't just walking away. He was erasing me. I took screenshots, saved PDFs, forwarded them all to Margot. Then I closed the laptop and sat for a moment in his leather chair, letting the weight of it all settle in. He wanted a clean exit. I was about to make it very, very messy. The next morning, the first motion was filed. A temporary freeze on all property transfers and financial withdrawals. By noon, Richard's assistant called him in a panic. Someone's filed a block on the Malibu Trust. He thought it was a mistake. By 3 p.m., he was pacing the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, frustration rising with every unanswered question. "I don't know what this is about," he said. "No, I didn't authorize a counterclaim. What do you mean asset concealment? Who's representing her?" I stepped into the room, leaned on the doorframe, and said softly, "Margot Lewis." He froze, turned slowly. "You hired her?" I nodded. He stared at me like I was a different person. "You said we'd be civil." "I am being civil," I said calmly. "I'm not shouting. I'm not throwing things. I'm just not being stupid." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm reacting just enough." He dropped onto a stool at the kitchen island, shaking his head. "I didn't want it to be like this." "But you did want it, Richard. And you wanted it to happen on your terms, your timing, your version of truth. You wanted me to take it quietly, to disappear from your story like I was never in it." I crossed the room and stood in front of him. "Well, I'm not disappearing." The days that followed moved like a quiet storm. Lawyers on both sides. Motions filed and challenged. Margot found inconsistencies in Richard's business filings, discrepancies in the prenup, and a witness, one of his former financial advisors, willing to testify that Richard had instructed him to reassign ownership of several assets in preparation for personal detachment, in other words, divorce fraud. And through it all, I remained calm, collected, focused. Richard, on the other hand, began unraveling. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, snapped at his secretary, slammed doors, drove in circles because the truth was finally cornering him. One night I came home late. The lights were off. I found him sitting alone in the dark kitchen, elbows on the counter, head in his hands. When he heard me, he looked up, eyes bloodshot, voice low. "What happened to you?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped closer, leaned in and whispered, "You filed for divorce on my birthday. This is what happens when you mistake love for weakness." Then I turned and walked away. And that was the moment he realized. The gift I gave him wasn't revenge. It was the truth finally unwrapped. 2 weeks after Richard filed for divorce, the first news headline hit. Tech investor Richard Rhodes accused of fraud by estranged wife. It was a small article at first, a sidebar on a local finance blog. But in our circle, even whispers become thunder. And this whisper was backed by filings, dates, and a name that carried weight: Margot Lewis. Within 24 hours, the story spread. Financial blogs, real estate forums, social media gossip pages. Even the city's glossy lifestyle magazine ran a brief, "A split worth millions. Rhodes' marriage crumbles amid legal firestorm." I didn't do interviews. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't have to. The documents spoke for themselves. And Richard? He panicked. He began calling everyone. His lawyer, his PR rep, his old college roommate who now ran a crisis management firm. But the damage was already out. His curated image, the charming investor, philanthropist, husband, had been pierced. He tried to call me too. 4 times. I didn't answer. I wasn't hiding. I was building. While Richard spun in circles trying to contain the fallout, I sat with Margot and finalized my public response, a single factual statement released through her office. My intention was never to bring our private matters into public view. However, I will not remain silent while misleading narratives circulate. I trust the legal process to bring clarity. I remain focused on rebuilding, not just what was taken from me, but what I lost along the way: peace, purpose, and truth. It was short, clean, devastating. The media pounced. They called me poised, powerful, dignified. That last word, dignified, felt like justice. Because Richard thought dignity meant silence. He never expected me to reclaim it so loudly. At the gym, his personal trainer stopped scheduling him during peak hours. At the club, whispers followed him to every table. At investor meetings, board members raised eyebrows over ongoing complications. His life, so carefully constructed, had begun to crack. And it wasn't because I sought revenge. It was because he underestimated what happened when a woman finally stopped shrinking to fit inside the space a man allowed her. One afternoon, I sat in the cafe down the street reading a book. A woman approached my table, soft-voiced, hesitant. "Julia." I looked up. She was young, maybe 28, nervous hands. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for speaking up, for not letting it be hidden." I blinked, surprised. She smiled, almost sadly. "He dated my sister a few years ago. It ended badly. She never told anyone why." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood. It wasn't just about me. It never had been. Back home that night, I received an email from Richard's lawyer, a thinly veiled threat about media interference, and a suggestion to avoid public escalation. Margot's response was simple. "Your client escalated the moment he filed secretly. My client merely responded with truth. Any discomfort caused by that truth lies squarely on the shoulders of the one who created it." Richard stopped trying to control the story after that because it was no longer his to control. The fire didn't die down. It spread. While Richard scrambled to salvage the ashes of his reputation, I quietly watched the empire he built on half-truths start to tremble. He had underestimated me, thinking that I would wither under the weight of scandal. But the irony? I had never stood taller. Every day, something else collapsed for him. The luxury developer he was working with pulled out of their joint venture. One of his board seats was suspended, pending internal review. Invitations dried up. Dinners he once hosted were now filled with awkward no-shows. His calendar, once packed with handshakes and deals, was now a silent witness to abandonment. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't throw a party. I didn't mock him. Because this was never about revenge. This was about balance. It was about setting a story straight that had been twisted for years. Margot updated me daily. His PR team is in chaos. His legal team is floating settlements under the table. And Julia, she paused. "They've seen your counterclaim. The details are rattling them." "He's used to being the smartest person in the room," I said. He didn't realize I was listening all along, and I had been. Every comment he made about women not understanding real power. Every time he mocked someone who lost everything in divorce. Every joke about how easy it was to protect yourself if you start early enough. I remembered it all. He never noticed how closely I paid attention. That weekend, I attended a gala alone, one we had RSVP'd to months earlier as a couple. I wore a navy gown, hair swept up, nothing flashy. But people noticed. They noticed the calm in my posture. They noticed the absence of Richard. They noticed that I wasn't hiding. A woman from the board of a tech firm came over, wine in hand. "Julia," she said, nodding respectfully. "I just wanted to say, it takes guts to stand your ground like this. We don't always get to see that." I smiled politely. "We always have a choice. Silence is just the one we're taught first." She blinked, then grinned. "Well, you're rewriting the script." Maybe I was. Maybe I'd been doing that from the moment I saw those divorce papers. On Monday, I received an envelope hand-delivered to my townhouse. Inside was a formal proposal. Richard's team offering a private settlement, 8 figures. Clean break, a gag order included. I brought it straight to Margot. "They think money can erase humiliation," she muttered, scanning the papers. "Can it?" I asked. She looked up. "Only if you let it." And I wouldn't. I didn't want hush money. I didn't want to sweep the betrayal under a designer rug and pretend we were two grown-ups who drifted apart. I wanted to leave the lie. Fully. Openly. And I wanted the world to understand something Richard never did. That being quiet isn't the same as being weak. That being kind doesn't mean being blind. That being a wife doesn't mean surrendering your identity. That night I walked through our former house, my house, room by room. The living room where we once danced barefoot. The bathroom mirror where he practiced speeches. The garden we planted together and never watered again. I stood in front of our wedding photo still hanging in the hallway. He looked young. I looked hopeful. I touched the frame gently, then turned and walked away. Some stories don't end with shouting. Some end in silence, in reclaiming what was always yours. The day I signed the final legal papers, there were no fireworks, no dramatic tears, no champagne. Just a pen, a signature, and silence. The settlement was finalized. The house was mine. The gag order was denied. The media frenzy had slowed to a simmer. And Richard, he had gone quiet, the loudest silence of all. The legal war was over. But my life, in a strange way, was just beginning. For weeks, my calendar had been filled with attorney calls, document reviews, and damage control. Now it was blank. For the first time in a decade, I had mornings without obligations, without someone else's schedule dictating my own. I made coffee slowly. I let the sun hit my skin on the balcony. I didn't check my phone first thing. It was uncomfortable. The stillness. But also, it was mine. I started to unpack the emotional debris, not just from Richard, but from myself. From all the versions of me I had silenced to keep the marriage afloat. The people around me noticed. My mother called one afternoon and said, "Your voice sounds different." Different how? Lighter. Like there's more space around your words. Maybe there was, because for so long I'd lived in a kind of performance. Not because Richard asked me to, but because I believed I had to. I thought being a good wife meant being small enough to fit into someone else's dreams. But now, the only dream I was responsible for was mine. I dusted off an old notebook filled with ideas I'd scribbled back when I was still in graduate school. Thoughts about nonprofit startups, education reform, women's leadership training. Ideas that once burned in me but had been shelved for later. Later had arrived. I called an old friend, Dana, who worked at a women's foundation downtown. "Do you remember those empowerment workshops we used to dream about starting?" I asked. She laughed. "I think we still have the folder somewhere." "Well," I said, "I'm ready now." The next day, I walked into their office and pitched a full project, a program for women going through high-stakes separations, divorce, legal battles, emotional recovery, not therapy. Not just legal advice. Real support, mentorship, purpose, rebuilding. They said yes. Just like that, I was no longer the woman at the center of a scandal. I was the woman building something from the ashes. Meanwhile, Richard's name still floated around in business articles. Most of them were neutral, some cautiously optimistic. His people were working hard to rebrand him. But the shine was gone. Investors weren't lining up anymore. The charm he once wielded like a weapon had dulled. One night, I received a message from one of his former employees. A quiet thank you. She said she'd always known something was off but never felt safe enough to speak up. Now she was. That mattered. That meant something deeper than court victories. It meant truth echoed, and I was done whispering mine. The mansion was still too big, too quiet. I kept the garden alive, planted new things, got rid of all the old art Richard had picked out. I started sleeping in a different bedroom, not because I couldn't face the past, but because I was choosing a different future. I went to a bookstore on a rainy Thursday and bought novels I'd never have read before. I took long drives with the windows down and music too loud. I said no to things that didn't feel right. I said yes to things that scared me. And I never ever checked Richard's social media, because I wasn't curious. I was healing. It was late autumn when the first letter arrived. A pale blue envelope addressed by hand slid under my front door. No return address. Inside, a single note. You're stronger than most people I know. Thank you for reminding me I can be too. Anonymous. At first I thought it was a one-off, a kind soul. Then the messages multiplied. Emails, DMs, even a thank you note tucked between pages at a bookstore I frequented. Women, strangers, were finding me. Not for gossip, not for drama, but for light. What had begun as my own unraveling had become a thread in something larger, a quiet revolution. I didn't answer every message, but I read every one. Some came from women stuck in golden cages, some from men who had walked away from toxic marriages but carried guilt like chains. Others came from people who simply said, "Your story made me pause." That word, pause, carried weight. We move so fast. We react. We defend. We hide. But pausing? That's when we feel. That's when we begin to shift. Dana and I launched our first workshop under the name Anchor. It was raw, vulnerable, beautiful. 10 women, 1 room, no cameras, no judgment, just space. Space to speak, cry, shout, laugh, dream. On the final day, one participant stood up. She had been married to a high-level executive in a Fortune 500 company, always smiling in public, always hurting in private. She said, "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm not alone inside my own skin." I cried with her, because I knew exactly what that meant. Meanwhile, Richard tried to pivot. He accepted a speaking engagement at a leadership summit, tried to present himself as resilient, a man misunderstood by the media. But halfway through his speech, someone in the audience asked, "If you had to start over with nothing but your character, where would that leave you?" He faltered, no rehearsed line, no charming smile, just silence. A clip of that moment made it to social media, went viral. The comments were brutal, and for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not pity, but clarity. This wasn't about taking Richard down. This was about rising, without him. I started journaling again, not about the past, but the present. The way my chest no longer felt tight every morning. The way I could walk into my kitchen and smile at the quiet. The way I no longer flinched when I heard the front gate open. I found myself dreaming again. Not revenge fantasies, not what-ifs. Real dreams. Books I wanted to write. Cities I wanted to see. People I wanted to meet. Not romantically, not as a replacement for anything. Just connections, moments, energy that didn't demand I be less than I am. One night, I took out the box of old wedding photos again. Not to cry, not to rage. Just to look, to honor the woman I was, who tried, who hoped, who believed. And then, I put it away, because honoring the past didn't mean staying in it. When I finally stood in front of a crowd to share my story, not in headlines but in my own voice, the room was silent. Then someone clapped, then another, and then an ovation. Not for the pain, but for the power that came after it. It arrived on a Tuesday, a day that had no particular meaning, no memory attached to it. Just an ordinary morning, until the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. The courier handed me a flat envelope, sealed in wax. Old-fashioned. No logo. Just my name, handwritten in a style I hadn't seen in years. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edge. Inside, a letter. 1 page, 2 paragraphs. Signed, Richard. My breath caught in my throat. Not because I missed him, but because I didn't expect him to say anything ever again that wasn't filtered through lawyers or media consultants. But this was raw. It read, "Julia, I've rewritten this letter 10 times, maybe more. I'm not looking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But after everything collapsed, I saw something I never let myself see while we were married. You, not the idea of you, not the woman I thought I could control. You, the real you. I've been reading about you, watching quietly, not out of spite, out of shame. What you've done with your pain. It's something I couldn't have imagined. You're not just surviving, you're leading. And I needed to say, however late, that I see it now. I see you." I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious. I just sat down, letter in hand, and stared out the window for a long time. Margot was the first person I told. "You kept it?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't know why. It's not an apology." "No," she agreed, "but it's something. Closure, maybe. Or the beginning of it." We sat in silence for a while, both of us sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Then I asked her what I hadn't dared speak aloud yet. Do people ever change? Or do they just get caught? She looked at me, serious now. Some change. Some pretend. And some regret what they lost more than what they did. That sounded like Richard. Later that day, I reread the letter. This time I noticed the small things. The slightly uneven handwriting, something I had once found charming. The indentation on the paper where he'd pressed too hard with the pen. The way he didn't ask for anything. "No, can we talk? No, I want you back." Just acknowledgement. A sentence stood out. "You're not just surviving, you're leading." It wasn't flattery, it was a fact. But hearing it from him stirred something strange. Not validation, I didn't need that, but recognition. From someone who once made me feel invisible in plain sight. That night, I walked into the study I had redecorated. Once his office, now a sunlit room filled with my favorite books, a soft rug, and a desk that overlooked the garden. I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and placed the letter inside a journal. I wrote a reply, but I never intended to send it. "Richard, you don't get to see me now and suddenly realize who I am. I was always this woman. You just chose not to look. I loved you. I tried. I bent until I broke. And still, I wanted us to win. But you were too busy playing a game I didn't sign up for. You measured worth in headlines, bank accounts, and who walked in the room with you. I measured it in honesty, in presence, in building something real. I'm not angry anymore. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've outgrown the place where anger lived. I've made a home elsewhere. One that doesn't depend on your memory or your regret. You were part of my story, but you're not the whole book." I closed the journal, and for the first time since the papers, the court, the cameras, I exhaled without hesitation. The next morning, I took the journal and tucked it deep into the drawer beside my bed. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because it no longer needed to be seen. The act of writing had been enough. Still, the letter lingered in my thoughts, not its words, but what they meant. A man like Richard, so wrapped in ego, in image, had broken character to acknowledge truth. That was rare, but I knew better than to mistake recognition for change. What startled me most wasn't the letter. It was that I didn't feel small anymore. For years, Richard's words had the power to shatter or soothe me. One compliment could rebuild my mood, one criticism could unravel my day. But now, his letter was just paper, ink, sentiment without sway. I had changed more than I realized. 2 days later, Dana called. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low. It's about him. Richard? Yes, someone forwarded a document to the Foundation's inbox. Anonymous sender. It's personal. My stomach tightened. I'm forwarding it to you now. When the email landed, I hesitated before clicking. The subject line was simple. She deserves to know. Attached was a PDF, a legal filing, from a trust account in the Caymans, dated 6 months before the divorce. It detailed a transfer, not to me, not to our joint assets, but to someone named Margaret Ellis. My breath caught. I knew that name. Margaret had been Richard's assistant 5 years ago. Quiet, efficient, forgettable, or so I'd thought. She had left suddenly, claiming a family emergency. I'd barely remembered her since, but there it was. A wire of $750,000, no note, just consulting and discretion. I closed my laptop slowly. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated betrayal. And suddenly, the letter made sense. The guilt, the attempt at closure, not because he wanted to make peace, but because the truth was on its way to the surface. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I got in the car. I drove for an hour, letting the wind push against the open windows, letting the road steal my thoughts. I ended up at a small cafe by the lake, the kind we used to visit before everything became strategy. I ordered tea, sat by the water, and thought about the difference between secrets and lies. A lie requires effort, maintenance, a script. But a secret, it just needs silence. And Richard had been very good at silence. When I returned home, I found another envelope at the door. This time, no handwriting, no wax seal, just plain white paper with a printed note inside. There's more. You should see the footage. No signature, no return address, no USB stick or file attached. Just that. At first I thought it was a prank, someone toying with my past. But something in me, a gut instinct honed by years of surviving half-truths, knew it was real. I called Dana. I think someone's trying to tip me off. I'll run a check, she said. But be careful. If this is going somewhere darker, you need to be prepared. Darker than what I've lived through. She was quiet for a moment. Let me rephrase. You need to be protected. That night, I dreamed of the house again. Not the current mansion, but the first one Richard and I lived in. The small, 2-story with creaky floors and mismatched tiles. In the dream, I was standing in the kitchen barefoot, staring at the clock. But the hands weren't moving. No ticking. Just silence. And then, slowly, the room filled with water. Not rushing, not violent, just rising, steadily, calmly, until it reached my waist, my chest, my throat. I didn't drown. I just floated. When I woke, I knew what I had to do. Not run, not retaliate, not seek revenge, but uncover everything. Not for closure, but for truth. Because truth doesn't heal, truth sets fire, and I was finally ready to burn what was left behind. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting long golden slivers across the floorboards. Julia sat upright in bed, her journal still on the nightstand, the letter from Richard untouched since that final revelation. But her world had shifted again, not because of what Richard had said, but because of what he hadn't. She brewed her coffee slower that morning, each step deliberate. No rush, no panic, just the weight of knowing there was more to uncover. She had always trusted her intuition, and today, it whispered louder than ever. You're not done. The call to Dana came just after sunrise. Run a trace on that anonymous message, Julia said, and check for any security footage at the gate from the last 2 days. Someone is trying to tell me something. I want to know who. Dana didn't argue. She knew better than to talk Julia out of it now. This wasn't about paranoia. This was about closure. Real closure. The kind you build with truth. Not hope. By mid-morning, Dana had results. Julia, she said, we found the source. The email came from a temporary address, routed through 3 international servers. but our IT guy recognized a pattern. It matches an older thread we flagged once, connected to your former housekeeper, Elena. Julia blinked. Elena. She hadn't thought about her in months. Elena had worked for them for over 5 years, always quiet, always watching. She had left without much explanation just before the divorce proceedings began. Do you have her address? Already texted it to you. Julia didn't hesitate. Within an hour she was on the road, heading 2 towns over to a modest apartment complex hidden behind a line of overgrown hedges. When she knocked on the door, it opened almost instantly. I thought you might come, Elena said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held stories. Why now? Julia asked. Elena motioned her inside. The living room was clean, but sparse. A single photograph sat on the mantel, a young girl holding a teddy bear. Elena noticed Julia's gaze. My daughter. She's the reason I left. I couldn't work for a man like that anymore. Not when I knew what I knew. What did you know, Elena? The older woman walked over to a drawer, pulled out a flash drive and handed it to Julia. Everything. Audio, video, emails, things he said when he thought no one was listening, documents he hid. I copied it before I quit. I didn't know what to do with it. Until now. Julia stared at the small piece of plastic in her hand. It felt heavier than gold. Why didn't you send it to the media? Because it wasn't my story, it was yours. Julia nodded slowly, her heart thudding. Thank you. There's one more thing, Elena said. Check the folder called November Room. That's where you'll find what he tried hardest to bury. Julia left without another word. Her hands shook the entire drive home. Back in her office, she inserted the drive into her laptop. The screen lit up. Dozens of folders, years of deception cataloged, organized, archived. She opened the November Room. Inside was a video file, dated 2 weeks before her birthday, the day Richard filed for divorce. She hit play. The footage showed Richard sitting in their former study, on a call. He didn't know he was being recorded, probably assumed the camera was off. Just push it through, he said into the phone. She'll be blindsided, it's her birthday. I want it to sting. She'll crumble, and when she does, I'll have full control of the estate. Julia froze. There it was. Cold. Calculated. Cruel. He had planned not just the separation, he had timed it for maximum devastation, and somehow she had survived it all. More than that, she had risen from it. But now, she had proof. Not for revenge, for the record, to never again doubt what she lived through, and to ensure no one else would either. The next day, Julia summoned Dana into her study and played the recording. Richard's voice rang through the space, full of arrogance and strategy. Dana stood silently, arms crossed, letting the truth settle over her like a winter coat. When the video ended, she exhaled sharply. This changes everything, Julia nodded. But I won't release it. Dana blinked. Why not? Because I'm done with battles. I'm not trying to win anymore. I'm trying to heal. It took a long pause before Dana finally nodded. Again, this time with admiration. You're stronger than you know. Later that afternoon, Julia composed a simple email. No subject, no greeting. Just the video file, and a line beneath it. I know. 3 hours later, Richard replied, You didn't have to be this kind, but I'm grateful. Maybe now I can face who I've become. She didn't respond. Instead, she closed her laptop and walked outside, barefoot, across the dewy grass. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. It was the same garden she once tried to save, the one Richard called a pointless waste of time. Now it flourished, just like she had. She sat beneath the arbor, the vines blooming around her like silent witnesses. With her notebook open, she began to write. This is not about divorce, this is about discovery. This is about learning to love the person I almost forgot I was. She wrote into the evening, as the light faded and fireflies danced across the hedges. Later that week, she met with her publisher. A memoir was on the table. Not for fame, not for Richard, for herself, and for every woman who had been broken and stitched herself back together. They would call it The birthday that changed everything. The truth didn't set her free. She set herself free. And that, in the end, was the only gift she ever needed to give. There are moments in life when time fractures. A single decision, a discovery, or a sentence spoken in cruelty. And suddenly, there's the life before and the life after. For Julia, the moment she found the divorce papers wasn't just a turning point. It was a rebirth, but rebirth is never painless. It requires a death first, of illusions, of false peace, of the identity she thought she had to protect at all costs. What began as heartbreak evolved into the most honest journey of her life. She didn't just lose a marriage, she lost the version of herself who tolerated being less than whole. And in that loss, she found her truth, raw, unwavering, and transformative. There is a particular pain that comes from betrayal. It is a wound that doesn't bleed openly but festers beneath the surface, silently altering the way we see the world and ourselves. Julia's discovery was more than a moment of heartbreak. It was the unraveling of everything she thought was real, and yet what defines a person isn't what happens to them, it's how they rise. Many might have chosen vengeance, to expose, to humiliate, to make the world see the cruelty, and perhaps the world would have applauded. But Julia chose something rarer and far more difficult: dignity. She chose to carry the weight of what she learned with grace, not as a weapon but as a lesson. In a culture obsessed with noise, she chose silence. In a world addicted to spectacle, she chose solitude. In an age that rewards outrage, she chose peace. And through those choices, she reclaimed a kind of power that can't be taken away. The power to define your story, not by what broke you, but by what you built afterward. The mansion, the assets, the court victories, they were symbols. But the real triumph wasn't legal. It was spiritual. It was emotional. It was in the quiet knowledge that she could stand in the ruins of a life she once built, stare down the ghosts that haunted it, and declare, "I am still here, still standing, still breathing, still becoming, and better yet, becoming someone stronger." This story resonates because it's not just Julia's. It's universal. It's about the unspoken grief so many endure, the betrayal behind smiles, the pain behind polished photographs. It's about the quiet suffering of those who love deeply, only to be shattered by the ones they trusted most. And most importantly, it's about what it means to refuse to be defined by that suffering. Julia's strength wasn't in what she did. It was in what she refused to become. She didn't become bitter. She didn't become broken. She didn't become him. She became the kind of woman who walks into a storm with her head high, who turns wounds into wisdom, who looks in the mirror and finally sees someone she's proud to be. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need validation. She didn't need permission to heal. Her greatest revenge was joy. Her deepest healing was the smile that came after tears. Her boldest act was loving herself enough to move forward. So if you, like Julia, have ever faced a moment where everything fell apart, where the ground beneath you collapsed, where the person you trusted most became a stranger, where your heart cracked so loudly it drowned out every hope you once held, know this: the shattering is not the end. Sometimes it's the beginning. The mansion wasn't the gift. The silence wasn't the defeat. The letter wasn't the closure. It was all part of her becoming. It was the crucible that shaped her. It was the storm that cleansed her. It was the loss that showed her the value of everything she had kept inside for too long. She didn't just survive. She transformed. And in that transformation, she wrote a new definition of strength. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, through trembling hands, through quiet mornings, through choosing peace when chaos is louder. And that kind of strength? It's unshakable. Because once you've walked through fire, once you've stood in the wreckage, and chosen to rebuild brick by brick, no one can take that power from you. Julia's story is not just a story of heartbreak. It's a story of resurrection, and now she lives not in the shadow of what happened, but in the light of what she chose next. She didn't burn bridges. She built doors. She didn't chase closure. She created beginnings. She didn't wait to be rescued. She became her own salvation, and in becoming she left behind the ashes of manipulation and rose, like a quiet phoenix, no fire needed, just truth, and that was enough. For her, and maybe, just maybe, for you too. Did this story move you? Don't leave without doing this. Like this video if Julia's journey touched something deep in your heart. Every click tells the platform, this matters. Comment below. What would you have done in her place? Your words might reach someone who needs courage right now. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We tell true-to-life stories that awaken something in the soul. And trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming. Share this story with someone you love or someone who's been through betrayal and needs to know they are not alone. Join the conversation in the comments. Your insight might be exactly what someone else is searching for. So Wish is a community of survivors, healers, and people who believe in starting over. Every week we bring you powerful, untold stories, not just for entertainment, but for healing, for reflection, for strength, from shattered trust to silent triumphs, from heartbreak to quiet rebirths. These are not just characters. These are moments you've lived, and moments you'll never forget. Here's how you can support this work. Subscribe, it's free, and it helps us reach more hearts like yours. Comment, we read every message. This channel was built for dialogue, not monologue. Like and share. It may seem small, but it changes everything. The more interaction, the more the algorithm shows this story to people who need it. Turn on notifications, so you're the first to know when a new story drops. Want more? We're building a space where truth is honored, silence is sacred, and stories don't need loud music or crazy editing to hit home. Just honesty, humanity, and a little light in the dark. Whether you're here because you're healing or because you just love a good story, welcome. You're not just a viewer here. You're part of something bigger. Thank you for watching, for feeling, for remembering what it means to stand back up. Because this is more than content. It's a mirror, it's a conversation, it's real, and it's only just beginning. Welcome to a place where stories are more than just entertainment. They're emotional journeys, mirrors of the soul, and sometimes unexpected lifelines. This is a channel for those who believe that storytelling still matters. That a voice, a silence, a choice, or a moment can change everything. Here, we bring to life untold stories, narratives that explore betrayal, resilience, loss, healing, and the powerful decisions people make when life doesn't go as planned. Every video we create is built to move you, not with cheap shock or sensationalism, but with authentic human emotion. Our mission is simple: to bring to light the emotional truths people often live in silence. We aim to turn whispered thoughts into cinematic experiences that speak to the heart. We craft each story as if it were a movie, with depth, pacing, character, and soul. Whether it's a woman who discovers divorce papers on her birthday, or a man who gives everything away to protect what matters most. These aren't just fictional tales. They are reflections of real human experience, made to echo what many have lived but never said aloud. Our content is made for those who appreciate well-told, emotionally powerful stories are healing from, something they can't put into words. Believe that silence can be louder than screams. Know that some victories don't come with applause, just peace. We don't chase trends. We chase meaning. We don't upload noise. We share narratives that stay. If you've ever cried quietly in your car, smiled after months of numbness, or walked away from something that no longer served your soul, this channel is for you. Here, your pain is respected, your strength is honored, and your story, even if it hasn't been told yet, is safe. New videos weekly, narrated with feeling, crafted with care. Subscribe to join a growing community of hearts that still feel deeply, because in a world that's always rushing, we choose to slow down and tell stories that remember what it means to be human. In a world full of noise and distraction, we choose emotion. Welcome to a channel where every single day, a new story is born. Stories that move, inspire, and sometimes even heal. Here, You won't find shallow content or forgettable trends. You'll find true-to-life emotional journeys, crafted to touch the heart and leave a lasting impression. We believe that behind every face there's a story waiting to be told, and that's what we do. Every day. A woman discovers betrayal on her birthday. A man loses everything and finds freedom in the process. A couple faces the impossible and chooses love anyway. These stories are more than fiction. They reflect the silent struggles so many people live through in secret. Our goal is to give voice to those moments, to turn quiet pain into powerful narrative, and to remind you that you're not alone. Whether you've come for healing, inspiration, or simply a good story told with heart, you're in the right place. New stories every day narrated with soul. Written to make you feel, not just watch, subscribe, and be part of something different. Something human. Because some stories aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt.